let's see. This is the outline of my talk. I will begin by give you a brief history of the term mutualism. You will see that this is very appropriate because we are in France, so I thought that you would like this. Then I'll talk about the importance of mutualisms in nature. I'm sure you all know that they are important, but I will convince you that they are very important. I will go through the threats, the main threats to mutualistic interactions. And then I will begin talking about how mutualism mediate biological invasions, and at the same time, how invasive species disrupt mutualistic native interactions, or native mutualistic interactions. And in the last section of my talk, I will show you how we use this network approach to study the invasion process and impacts. And I will end also with some challenges for future research for the students that here want to study mutualisms. Okay, the term mutualism was brought into biology in a lecture that this renowned zoologist, Pierre-Joseph van Beneden, he gave a lecture at the Royal Academy of Belgium nearly 150 years ago, titled A Word on the Social Life of Lower Animals. 2 years later, all these lectures he was giving were incorporated into this book titled Les commensaux et les parasites dans le règne animal, which was translated also into German and English. And here he classified the species, the animal species interactions. They were not thinking about plant-animal interactions at those times. And he classified them in parasitic, commensalistic, and mutualistic. And he distinguished commensalism from mutualism, saying that commensalism was the sharing the food of a neighbor without doing it harm, whereas mutualism was the relationship in which the two species benefit. As a convinced Catholic, Van Beneden thought that Darwin's emphasis on the struggle for existence was too strong, too exaggerated. And he said even it was distasteful. Previously, the word mutualism had referred to a political idea in counterpoint to this predominant emphasis on struggle. And the most famous exponent of the French mutualism, that's why this word, it seems it was born here in France. That's why I think it is very appropriate that you know this. The most famous exponent was Pierre-Joseph Proudhon. He's a philosopher, he was a revolutionary, and one of the fathers of anarchism. He believed in the abolition of governments, of central governments, and on a restructure of the society in which there were cooperatives of volunteer workers. Okay, the biological term of mutualism was soon taken up after Van Beneden's book. And the first to use it is Alfred Victor Espinasse, who was a controversial philosopher, French philosopher too, considered the precursor of ethology and sociobiology, who defended his thesis at the Université de Paris, titled De Société Animale. The main messages of his thesis were that human societies have evolved out of animal societies, and that humans could gain insights into cooperation from studying animal societies. Unfortunately, French zoologists ignore the work by Espinasse, since they consider it as a philosophical treatise. But it actually has scientific data, although he didn't go to the field, but he gives many examples of mutualistic interaction between animals, and his work has philosophical implications. You will like to know an anecdote that at those times, his thesis, he had written a discussion on the ideas of another French philosopher named Auguste Comte. I'm sure most of you have seen or know about him. He's considered the father of the positive philosophy and sociology. He was a very altruistic person, and he was actually the who created the word altruism. Well, Espinasse, in his introduction of the thesis, discussed the ideas of Auguste Comte. And it seems that when he planned to defend the thesis at the University of Paris, there was somebody at the committee that thought that they wouldn't like that introduction, the ecclesiastical authorities wouldn't like that introduction. So he had to remove it in order to defend the thesis. Can you imagine this happening now? So, well, finally, after some discussions, the final agreement was that the first edition would go without the introduction, and after, I think it was 500 copies, then the introduction could be restored. Okay, another important person in the history of the mutualisms is this Peter Kropotkin, as considered a celebrity. He was a philosopher, a scientist, and also a very activist person. He was in Siberia for 5 years doing scientific expeditions and illustrated very well the phenomenon of cooperation. He studied non-human animals. He used also examples in pre-feudal societies and medieval cities and in modern times, and concluded, he published this very famous book, Mutual Aid, A Factor of Evolution, and the main message of the book was that cooperation and mutual aid are the most important factors in species evolution and the ability to survive. I'll say that Peter Kropotkin is considered by many people like one of the precursors or the precursors of the mutualism as a theory. Okay, now we jump some decades and we move to 1985 when this book, The Biology of Mutualism, Ecology and Evolution, is published. It's edited by Douglas Boucher, still an active scientist, although he's not doing much science currently. This book has 15 chapters written by experts at the time, encompassing terrestrial and aquatic ecosystems, and also genetic aspects and ecological aspects. There are chapters by Daniel Jansen, Templeton, Adicott. Well, highly recommended for students that want to work on mutualism. Now we move some years later, and we go to 2003, when this paper appears in Trends in Ecology and Evolution by Bruno and colleagues, claiming that it's time to bring facilitation, positive interactions, into ecological theory, because they say that including mutualistic interactions in population and community models, they change many of the predictions of the models. So, that's the message they give in this opinion paper, and this paper has received many citations and stimulates much research on, like the book by Boucher too, stimulated much research into mutualistic interactions. And since 2003, we moved to last year, when Judith Bronstein, who is a person that has been working on mutualism for many years, has published this book titled Mutualism, which also covers many aspects, ecological and evolutionary aspects, and at different scales, from individual to ecosystems. And what Doug Boucher says about the book is one of the pleasures of reading Judith Bronstein's marvelous new book is seeing that mutualism is no longer a problem. The apparent contradiction between what clearly is and ought to be have by and large been resolved. And there are not only solutions for mutualism's existence problem, but a wide array of new concepts, methods, and tools. There is also a chapter on networks that take biologists in exciting new directions. So I think this book will be a benchmark that will keep many students busy for the next generation, next generations. Okay, with all these studies we have, many people have been doing on mutualism, we can give some generalizations. First, they are prevalent in all ecosystems, from the tropics to the tundra. Most organisms are directly or indirectly associated with at least one mutualistic partner, and some even with hundreds, many. Mutualists play an essential role in determining how communities are organized and perform. They have shown also to be important drivers in the diversification of life. They are crucial for land colonization by plants associated with fungal symbionts. I will show you in a moment some examples. We know that many mutualists have been evolving for over millions of years, whereas others have undergone spectacular shifts in partner identities, and this can also occur very quickly, as also it's being found now in ongoing research. And they can change specificity over evolutionary timescales and even in outcomes ranging from mutualism to antagonism. And also mutualists are important because it was mentioned this morning in several talks. They provide essential services such as biotic pollination, also seed dispersal, or the constitution of critical components of global cycles of carbon and nitrogen, etc. I'll go very quickly through the different types of mutualists. Well, those I will be focusing on this in this talk, which are mycorrhizal and rhizobial symbiosis, pollination, and seed dispersal. We know that about 90% of the world's plants belong to families that are mycorrhizal. There are several rather recent reviews that show this. This microbial symbiosis facilitates soil aggregation and carbon sequestration by plants. There are at least 3 types of mycorrhizas. The arbuscular ones are the most common. They are prevalent in undisturbed terrestrial systems and found in almost 3/4 of all plant species. Then we have the ectomycorrhizas. These are more prevalent in the tropics, in woody plants, in temperate and boreal zones, but in woody plants. And then there are the ericoid mycorrhizas. These are more rare. They predominate in heathland and boreal habitats. We also know that about 80% of legumes, so most legumes and most cultivated species, show this rhizobial symbiosis. So they are important in most species of plants. And we also know by rather recent research that they also have an influence on above ground processes. And they may determine the levels of herbivory and pollination going on above ground. Regarding biotic pollination, there is a very well-cited paper that shows that nearly 90% of the flowering plants are pollinated by animals. That doesn't mean they all depend on animals, but they are visited by, the flowers are visited by animals. We also know that 75% of the world's main food crops depend on animals to set seeds. And we know that biotic pollination is also a key driver of diversification of some major groups of plants and animals. And regarding seed dispersal, we have also some figures by recent reviews. up to 90% and 60% of plant species in tropical and temperate regions, respectively, are dispersed by animals. Biotic dispersal provides a way of escaping from competitors and enemies around plants. This has been, of course, shown in many previous papers, but I'm giving you a reference of a chapter we published 3 years ago in which we review the importance of biotics in dispersal. It helps maintaining genetic diversity and drives adaptation of plants to changing environments. And we also know that there are rare long-distance seed dispersal by animals, and this has shown to be crucial for population spread and maintenance of genetic connectivity for many species. Okay, these ecological interactions are threatened, like the rest of ecological interactions, mainly by habitat fragmentation and changes in land use, by modern agricultural practices, the movement of organisms across the globe, including many symbionts that we are moving to increase crops, and this often translates into biological invasions. Of course, climate change affects many interactions, and mutualisms very clearly. They may have a different effect on the plants and the animals, so there is a temporal mismatch, or they can change the distribution of one more than the other, and then there is also a spatial mismatching. So this is commonly being found. And then there are interactions among these factors, and also are important, right? So a land that has been fragmented, a landscape that has been fragmented, can also enhance the presence of invasions, and can also be influenced by these mismatches in space, etc. So it is actually a challenge to discern among the effect of all these drivers of what we call disruption. So mutualistic disruptions are increasingly being reported, and they often result in declines in species populations, and they can have detrimental consequences for ecosystem functioning. A new line of research is this, in front of these threats to mutualisms, is to understand how they become resilient to these drivers of global change. So a recent paper, well, for me it's very recent, but it's already 6 years ago, by Kears and collaborators, including Judith Bronstein, published a very nice paper in Ecology Letters where they identified 3 ways to respond, of mutualism respond to global change. First, mutualism can shift to antagonism under particular situations. So for instance, mycorrhizal populations can become less beneficial or even antagonistic when the sites are nutrient enriched. We are seeing this also when we are looking at the networks, that there is a rewiring. So species can switch to novel partners when these arrive into the community, or when one species is lost. And for instance, also they can become more generalized in their interactions. And it can also happen that mutualistic interactions, when they are not needed, they can be abandoned completely. So for instance, in response to pollinator declines, if plants have a facultative breeding system, they can become less dependent on them, and even in the long run can become totally selfing without depending of animals. As I say, this evolutionary research on mutualism resilience is still in its infancy. So all this still needs much evidence to be confirmed, and perhaps even more mechanisms will be found. Okay, I'll drink a bit. We'll move then Now to the biological invasions, which is part of the title of my talk. You know that biological invasions, as other drivers of global change, have caused losses in diversity over the last century. I'm sure you know this diagram, where they identified this, for each of the biomes, the magnitude of the effect. So the red one is higher, stronger effect. Higher impact on biodiversity, whereas the arrows indicate the tendency in the future, the actual trends. So if we focus on invasive species, grasslands and icelands are those most affected by invasive species, and the tendency, in all cases, is to grow. And of course, also you know that invasive species are an issue. Now many organizations are trying to tackle this problem, and I just put some of them here. The last one is the EPBS. Okay, so let's enter into the invasion. Okay, the long-standing paradigm for most of the history of invasions was that communities have a biotic resistance against these invaders. And the reason, or the main idea, of course, was of Charles Elton, who published this also famous book, very well cited, and like the Bible for the people studying invasions. And yeah, the idea behind was that these antagonistic interactions like herbivory, parasitism, etc., competition, are limiting the entrance and spread of invasive species. But several decades later, a group of people led by Dave Richardson from Stellenbosch University challenged this idea and began thinking, maybe after reading Kropotkin's ideas, that mutualism could also play a more important role than they had thought until then. So they compiled a very long list of mutualistic interactions that enhance plant invasions. That's the main topic they work on. And they published this paper in Biological Review, I think, has received more than 500 citations or around that. Okay, and since then, there are many papers appearing on how facilitative interactions influence different types of invasions in aquatic systems, in terrestrial systems, and well, this is, there is much research going on this. Okay, just focusing on the process of plant invasion, I'll show you how the different types of mutualisms can help crossing all these borders that an alien plant has to cross to reach or to become invasive. You see that it's only a low fraction of those that arrive get to this stage of invasive. The plants found all these type of barriers: geographic, environmental, local, environmental, reproductive, dispersal, environmental. And these mutualisms can help them crossing these borders, as I say. So these first barriers at the beginning of the invasion process can be enhanced by plant micromutualisms, a bit later by plant pollinator mutualism when the seeds have recruited and the plant is flowering, and later by seed dispersal mutualisms. Even the same invasive plant can be enhanced by the three different types of mutualistic interactions. So this seed can need or may need the the mutualistic aid by microbial by microbes. It may produce flowers that require the visits by pollinators to set seeds. And it can be a plant that produces fleshy fruits and needs vertebrates or ants for seed dispersal. Moreover, we can find that in each of these mutualistic interactions, alien microbes or alien pollinators or alien dispersers can be involved. So we have positive feedback mechanisms also in each of the processes. So the importance of each type of mutualisms in each phase of the life cycle depends on the traits and requirements of the plant invader. That's the ability to establish without symbiotic microbiota, the capacity to self, the degree of a specialized pollination, and the capacity to propagate vegetatively and or disperse by wind, for instance, or by water. Right? Okay, now let's see how what's the incidence of this type of or mutualistic interactions in invasive alien floras. The review by Pringle on mycorrhizal symbiosis and invasive plants in Annual Review of Ecology and Systematics is a very, very good review, shows that a large proportion of successful plant invaders form symbiosis with mycorrhizal fungi. And 45% of these high impact invaders do need the mycorrhizas. A clear example is this pine forest the conifers that invaded South America, together with their co-invasive mycorrhizas. And the mechanisms of this enhancement of the plant invasions is that they alter the nutrient uptake, or they alter the competitive dynamics with native microbes, the successional changes, and also plant-herbivore interactions to the advantage of the alien species and detriment of the native one. In the review we did with Dave Richardson, we also got the list of the most widespread invasive woody species and searched in the literature if they form or not mycorrhizal symbiosis, and we found that at least 1/3, for many species there was no information, but at least 1/3 do form mycorrhizal symbiosis. So the incidence of these mutualistic interactions is rather important. Focusing on legumes, they are associated with nitrogen-fixing proteobacteria. The more commonly known are the rhizobium, the bradyrhizobium, important invaders in different parts of the world. And except for a few cases, they can establish the legumes in new areas with no problem. So most legumes show high levels of nodulation. So this is because either there are effective rhizobia distributed widely between continents, or many legumes can nodulate with a wide range of rhizobia strains when they get into a new area. Also in 2010, it was described for the first time a case of invasional meltdown, invasional complex, where an alien facilitates the invasion of another alien, and that one of the other, reciprocally. And this was found with alien legumes and alien microsymbionts. One also common example that you may have heard of an invasion that became an invasion when the microorganism arrived into the area is this Myrica faya. It's an endemic species from the Canary Islands. It was introduced in Hawaii as an ornamental, and first arrived there, it seems, without the Frankia mycorrhizas. And only after these, other individuals arrived with these fungi, then it became invasive. Another example is this sorghum alepense. It's one of the 10 worst weeds for agriculture. This has bacterial endosymbiosis, which contribute to the invasion of this herb by enhancing the plant traits of biomass, growth rate, competitive effects, and also it provides the plant with herbivore defenses. It's a very good thesis, not published yet, as far as I know. I have looked at Web of Science, but the thesis it's available in internet. And well, she works specifically on this topic that is called now the MECA, like microbially enhanced competitive ability. It's called this novel strategy, novel invasion strategy. Okay, together with Susana Rodriguez Echevarria, who works with this rhizobium and acacia, and I work above ground, we sat together and prepared this review on the putative linkages between the mutualism below and above ground during these alien plant invasions. I'm not sure if you can read the letter, especially from far away, but I can hardly read it myself here. This is an invasive plant that has either mycorrhiza or symbiotic nitrogen fixers. So this, when this mutualism goes on, they can modify the flower traits, so flower size and number, the quantity and quality of nectar, of the pollen also, of the volatile compounds. All these will affect pollination. This will affect fruit size, number of seeds and quality of seeds, which will affect the seedling recruitment, and if the plant is dispersed by animals, it will affect the seed dispersal success. So these are like a schematic representation of the potential linkages that can happen. For some of them, we do have evidence already, and for others, we don't. Well, this is similar, but when in the case that the invasive alien plant does not have mycorrhizas, but still can have an effect on the interactions that native plants have with these symbionts. So I won't go through that. Okay, incidence of pollinator dependence on invasive plants. We have rather little information on whether invasive species can self or not, and the breeding system. It's quite time-consuming studying the breeding systems, so we have that just for a small proportion of plants. What we have allows us to say that it seems there is a positive association between the selfing ability and in plant invasiveness. There's another review paper by Roger and collaborators. Focusing on the alien flora of Central Europe, Pisak and collaborators also find that the frequency of selfing increases along the introduction, naturalization, and invasion continuum. In our review, we found that almost all the world's most invasive woody plants are also biotically pollinated. But for most, we have no idea if they are facultative or obligate outcrossers. And well, in that review that Richardson and colleagues did in 2000, they had already found that many plant invaders are highly generalized. They are visited by many pollinators, a high diversity of pollinators, and that pollen limitation didn't seem to be an important constraint limiting the invasion of plants. Okay, and here I bring you one of the examples that show how alien species. This is the bird flower visitation network of the Galapagos archipelagos, or the 13 islands we've been studying, by looking at the transport of pollen in the beaks and feathers of birds. So all these are the birds, and these are the plants. The native plants are in green color, whereas the violet are the alien, which are 29%, more or less. So you can see, like, for instance, these two, Impatiens glandiflora or Pisidium guava, they are acting as even hubs. So they are being pollinated or visited by many of these species, even more than most of the natives. I'll go to these examples later on. Also, when we compare the different species level metrics between alien species and native plant species, we found no differences in either the degree, or a metric that's called the specialization level, or the selectiveness level, and species strength. So what we find is that an alien species like this famous Lantana camara, invasive in many parts of the world, does as well as this endemic Lantana from Galapagos. So overall, no significant differences in linkage patterns. And even this outlier here all the time is this Psidium guava that produces these large flowers with much pollen and much nectar, and is visited by the highest number of pollinators. And well, the same has been found when looking at insect pollinators. Insect pollinators in the pollination network of Galapagos. This is another paper, another methodology. These are looking at visits of in direct observations on the plants. There are about 20% of the insects that are alien. And when we compared also the metrics at the species level, we find that alien insects even visit more flowers than, well, marginally more than the endemics, and much more than the native ones, although they don't differ in selectiveness. But at least in the degree of generalization, aliens are more generalized. So this seems to be a pattern. Alien species, either plants or pollinators, tend infiltrate the networks by being generalist, and also, as I'll show you later, by linking to generalist species. So, well, I think I said all this. Yeah, in this, yeah, that's it. Okay, now, regarding the seed disperser, the incidence of biotic seed dispersal in invasive plants, I'll give you also some figures. The first survey that was done in North America, studying about 200 species of invaders, about 45% were dispersed by animals, mostly by birds, followed by mammals, and a very small percentage by ants. And also a large fraction had no special adaptations to animal dispersal. In our review, again, we found that at least 2/3 of the most widespread wood invaders produce fleshy fruits, which suggests they are dispersed by animals. Fleshy fruits or other fleshy structures. And we find that, however, that more than 90% have also this capacity to propagate independently of dispersers. So most invasives seem not to be limited by dispersal. And like in the case of pollination, most invasive plants with fleshy fruits are also dispersed by a wide array of dispersers. I'll show you some network data later. And lastly, last but not least, there are some invaders that colonize new areas thanks to a long-distance dispersal that can be mediated by animals. And there are a number of examples of seeds that are dispersed by seagulls or by pigeons, stranded migrant birds, my ravens, well, etc. I'll quickly show you the results of a study we did in the Balearic Islands and in the Canary Islands, and also in Catalonia, and also in Benidorm Island, with the different species of Opuntia, which are, as you know, very invasive here in the Mediterranean area. And the fruits of this cactus are dispersed by a wide array of dispersers, which include birds, reptiles, mammals, and different functional groups in each group. So in this study, we gathered scats of all these animals in all the sites, and we germinated the seeds and look at differences between alien species, and we mentioned that, among those that white assemblage, there were aliens and natives. So we compare that, and well, I don't have time to go into the details of this, but we find that there are no differences between natives and aliens in their efficiency as seed dispersers when we looked at percentage of germination of the seeds that have passed through their guts. Okay, and I brought this slide, especially for Frederick. We worked in one project some years ago on invasive plants in Mediterranean islands, and we worked in the Balearics, here also in the island of Porquerols. This, actually, I brought one picture of Porquerols. It's Carpobrotus. Well, there are several species. It's native in South Africa, but has invaded many Mediterranean areas, also in California. And it propagates vegetatively, but it is also dispersed by alien mammals. So this case would be also a potential example of invasional meltdown, although we have not studied this. The seeds are so tiny that pass intact through the stomachs of a rat and through the teeth, because usually rats are seed predators, but if the seeds are so tiny, they actually were found by the team of Frederick that they germinated even better than control seeds not ingested. And rabbits also eat the fruits. They make these big holes and disperse the seeds effectively. And at least in the Balearics, we have found that once they have bitten this, they are very hard, and each fruit produces about 2,000 flea-sized seeds. These lacertid lizards also eat and disperse the seeds and also can germinate. And the last example of this plant invasion mediated by seed dispersers, it comes from Galapagos. One of the worst invaders there is this blackberry, Rubus niveus. It's native from southern Asia. It has colonized many islands, all the inhabited ones. This one from San Cristobal, that's the worst. It produces this fruit also with tiny seeds that are dispersed by most birds. We have found this when doing the seed dispersal networks. So even animals that we would consider seed predators, like most finches, they pass intact seeds and they move seeds all over the islands. So it is a big concern. And you may have seen this about 5 years ago in Science. It was a paper because there was a big controversy in Galapagos on what to do with the blackberries and also GABA, well, on invasive species in general and invasive plants specifically. So Mark Gardner was the head of the restoration department at that time. Now he got tired of bureaucracy and he gave up, and now it's another person, but he was one of the people that was arguing that it was time to embrace invasives, considering them as native to Galapagos, that they have been, well, blackberries now cover more than 30,000 hectares, and said, as far as I am concerned, it's now a Galapagos native, and it's time to accept it as such. Imagine that the stakeholders there were very, very upset with this. And well, what it's true is that they have invested much money, but at that time about $1 million, trying to eradicate this invasive species, and well, only they had succeeded in 4. So it is actually something has to be done. Anyway, and now I'll move to the other side of the coin, the mutualistic disruptions, going briefly through the plant rhizosphere disruptions with which I have not worked, and giving you some more examples on pollination and seed dispersal disruptions. Okay, in this review we did with Dave, we also identified the potential effects of drivers of global change on different types of, these 3 different types of mutualistic interactions. And well, I won't go in detail, just biological invasions can promote changes in the diversity of and abundance of native microbes, and can also modify plant recruitment and diversity patterns. Regarding pollination mutualism, it can also lead to changes in seed set, in genetic structure. When a plant is a congeneric species, it may produce hybridation. There may be hybridation processes also with detrimental effects, etc. Regarding these microbial mutualisms, very little is known relatively to other mutualisms on the effects of plant invasions on these native microbial interactions. 2 nice studies found that invasive species may either enhance or degrade the mutualism between native plants and fungal symbionts. A recent meta-analysis by Bond and colleagues found that arbuscular mycorrhizal fungal abundance does not differ between native and invasives, although the fungal communities are different when we compare them. By changing the soil communities, the invaders can generate positive feedbacks that enhance both its own competitiveness and subsequent interactions with its native neighbors. And there is also some nice evidence from several studies. We also know that some aliens release allelopathic compounds into the soil, and this may affect the mutualisms, the native mutualisms below ground, and also the mutualism above ground. And there is this, one of the first papers showing this by Hale and Callis, so a very nice paper. And even if not mycorrhizal, an invader may facilitate the invasion of other non-mycorrhizal plants, creating what has been called the long-term legacy effects. And another, well, this is largely an explored effect, but also the introduction of alien symbiotic microbes can shift hosts in the new range, disrupting also native mutualistic networks. At least that, as far as I know, this has been shown only in the case of Acacia longifolia. Okay, so these are just generalizations, and I'm not giving any example because I prefer to tell you more about our own data. With Carolina Morales, in 2009, we did this meta-analysis comparing the impacts of aliens versus native plants on pollination, visitation, and reproductive success in studies that had looked at competition between the target plant and the other co-flowering species. We compiled data from 40 studies, and well, our conclusions were that alien plants have a negative effect on pollination and reproductive success. These are the aliens, in the case visitation and reproductive success. Well, I'm signaling here, but I don't see any cursor there, so just strange. Anyway, and the effect is more detrimental when the alien and the focal species have similar flower symmetry or color. So when competition is more likely. In a more recent study, was the work of a master's student, we looked at the effect of another famous in the Mediterranean plant invader, that's Oxalis pescaprae, and we looked at how or to what extent it competes with a self-incompatible native plant, that's Diplotaxis erucoides, which flower in early spring or late winter. And we found, well, I won't go into the details here, we compared six localities in Mallorca. We removed we look at the effect of the scale, comparing a landscape, the scale, and a local scale, removing Oxalis flowers. And we found that, depending on the spatial scale, there were some differences. And also most interesting, because this had already been reported, but not this, that depending on the pollinator group, there were there were differences on the effect of the presence of the invader. So Apis mellifera and Bombus preferred the Oxalis flowers to the Diplotaxis flowers. But the non-corbiculate bees show no differences. So the message here is that you have to take into account the spatial scale of investigation when you say these plants compete or these plants are mutualistic. And you also have to realize that you cannot pull all the different types of pollinators into one bag because they can have different responses. With Matthias, we have also been working in a topic that, unfortunately, there is very little data yet, almost non-existent. And it's just at the impact that invasive plants have on the reproductive success of pollinators. So we built this insect, the bee nest, and put it in invaded areas, non-invaded areas. We did that study in Mallorca and Catalonia. And, well, using the areas invaded by Carpobrotus. We are still analyzing this, so I have don't have any graph, but hopefully I will have it soon. When the invasives are insect species, which is also quite common now due to this commercial transport or social bees like bumblebees or honeybees, they can easily lead to a disruption of the native mutualistic interactions. What time? 3 minutes? Oh my God. Okay, then I will have to move quickly. Okay, well, this is one of the first examples that show that the alien bees led to a disruption and is displacing the native bee. The effects of pollinators the invasive pollinators are more important than the effect of invasive plants. I'm going to skip this. I don't know why I talked so slowly. I'm so sorry. Anyway, well, I was going to talk about this effect. This study, we have been working for a while on a relict shop that was dispersed by native lizards in the islets where they are still survive. But now these lizards have been replaced by alien mammals who in turn acted as their predators. Well, in the past, even these tortoises were dispersing the seeds. Well, I'm going to move. I'll go directly. Well, you can read, all this is published, so it was just one example. But since I knew that there was a wide range of topics here, I thought it would be better to show you generalizations instead of data of specific studies. Well, just these disruptions can have demographic consequences and genetic consequences. We have examples in the Balearics of both things. And since there is a symposium on networks, I'm sure you can... I'll go directly to the challenges, that I think that's important. Okay. Yeah, do I have time to go through the challenges? I'll go very quickly. Biological invasions provide these superb natural experiments for exploring many aspects of ecology. We need more manipulative experiments because all is observational data, most of it, and then it's difficult to understand the mechanisms. So removing the plants or removing the pollinators will tell us much more interesting information. Also, regarding microbial symbionts, there is a large field to study. Also, this effect of the geographical scale of the mutualistic interaction. The effects of invasions need to be examined together with those of other drivers of global change. Usually they are separated, and we know that in nature they interact. This network approach, together with phylogenetic methods, is a tool that can help us also understand how they integrate and how they impact the native interactions, and will also help us predicting extinction cascades and evaluating the degree of community resistance. And finally, integrating the study of mutualistic interactions with invasion ecology, so may shed light on the possibility of finding species, alien species that are functionally redundant or are ecological analogs for extinct native species. And merci beaucoup. I'm sorry for talking so slow. I usually talk much faster, but today I don't know what happened. I thank my colleagues in this mutualistic and invasive work, David Richardson, and my group of island holics is how we call us. And I thank also the institutions that fund my research. Thank you. Sorry.